Welcome everyone to Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte again. So pleased for those of you that braved the big storm to get here. Thank you for doing that. My name is Thia Powers, and I'll be guiding us through the last talk in our series on the Brahma Viharas tonight, which is one of my favorite topics. The topic is equanimity. And I don't have on a microphone. I hope that you can hear me in the room. Great. So tonight's talk is inspired by 4 books, and I am putting them in the chat, and they are, of course, Loving Kindness by Sharon Salzberg. I think everybody has named that book, and I did not read it until I had to prepare this talk. I've had it for probably 10 years, so it's a wonderful book. And the book Happiness by Matthew Ricard, a French monk. And Bhikkhu Analayo's book, Compassion and Emptiness, which is an amazing book. And then the Visuddhimagga, which is another text that I haven't delved into until preparing this talk, and I'll tell you more about that when we get to that reference. So we've been studying the Brahma Viharas throughout the month of April, and tonight, the first Wednesday in May, we'll conclude with what's called sometimes the crown jewel, or equanimity. Tonight we'll look at the root word of equanimity, which is upekkha in Pali, explore the meanings of equanimity and the ways that equanimity bless us in our community. So this is a powerful state of being that we're going to talk about tonight. And then we'll close with real ways that we can cultivate this, because I think if we ever needed equanimity, it's now. I feel like every time I leave my house, it's just crazy out there. So in his book, Compassion and Emptiness, Analayo distinguishes our 4 Brahma Viharas, he calls them the immeasurable states, by using images of the sun. For karuna, or compassion, he uses the image of the sun setting, meeting the darkness of suffering with tenderness and care. For for metta, or loving friendliness, he says, is like the sun at noon, bright and strong, shining on everyone. Karuna is the image of the sun setting, meeting the darkness of suffering with tenderness and care. Mudita, or appreciative joy, carries the image of the sun rising, brightening up everything in its path, moving upward with freshness and inspiration. And then for the image of upekkha, or equanimity, he uses the full moon, reflecting the light of the sun in a vast and cloudless sky. In this analogy, loving friendliness, compassion, and joy all have a warm quality to them, like the sun itself, while equanimity is cooler, like a luminous moon reflecting the sun's rays. This cooler quality does not signify a lack of caring. Far from being dry and indifferent, true equanimity is affectionate and offers a tangible presence, but one that is free of reactivity and anxiety. So as we look at the historic root of the word, we go to the Pali word upekkha. Upekkha is variously translated as non-attachment, non-discrimination, impartiality, tolerance, and of course, equanimity. And you can see why I think it's so needed now, probably. The word is formed from the prefix upa, which means over or all around, and the root word ik, I-K-H, which means to look or to see. So this is the capacity to see the full picture from the top of the mountain, to perceive a situation in its entirety and without bias. So the purpose of upekkha is to see clearly and quench reactivity, to function without the interference of desire and aversion. The word equanimity implies equality and evenness. Even in the first 4 letters, it almost looks like it's spelling equal. And in this sense, it endows the other Brahma-viharas of loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy with patience and with an ability to be steady and to endure, even when love or sympathy or rejoicing is not returned. We are able, with an equanimous heart and mind, to continue to be fully present. The Brahma-viharas in concert all together form an epic kind of universal love, boundless and inexhaustible. They almost seem like superpowers to me. So even with a little equanimity, we have an increased ability to not only go the course, but to respond creatively with heartful wisdom and the vision of the bigger picture. As a person who is continually learning, it seems over and over, I'm learning not to judge. I'm very interested in this specific Brahma-vihara because when I notice that I'm having an experience of equanimity, what I notice is that serene discernment is present. To me, this feels like a much wiser and more mature version of my maybe not so helpful action of judging. So this is a rewarding state to aspire to. It's a great relief to not act out of judgment. Sometimes it feels like I've been carrying a heavy pack of accumulated judgment, and every few steps I realize I can just stop and unload another one out of the pack. Just say, I don't need this. I think I'll let it go. So equanimity has a lighter quality of quiet discernment as opposed to the heavier quality that judgment brings. Recently, a new neighbor, I'll call him Paul, began cutting things down on the property line between our houses. Now, those of you who know me know that I call myself a rabid gardener, an avid gardener. And so this makes me nervous, like a mother with children that are in danger. When I could no longer stand the sounds of chainsaws and grinders, I walked over and talked with Paul, and he told me that he hated the bamboo growing along the border between our 2 homes. And I told him I didn't plant the bamboo and agreed that it is terribly invasive, but it can be controlled. And then I kind of mentioned that he was cutting stuff on our side of the property line, chopping up small trees and shrubs that I had planted last year. He looked away and he mumbled an apology, but I would soon find out that his actions did not support his words. So yesterday, I'm putting the final touches on this talk and feeling very equanimous. And a large riding mower appears outside the window and begins grinding everything down to the dirt. I wanted to bolt out the door, but instead I closed my eyes and waited, and I noticed my suddenly spiking heartbeat, and I could feel the anger shooting up into my head. And I reminded myself that equanimity is possible and can be quite powerful just in moments like this. So that was my aspiration as I put on my shoes and stepped outside for an opportunity to practice. When I went outside, Paul would not meet my gaze or stop the mower. I had to stand in front of the mower. I saw the tiny dogwood and the maple saplings all chopped up. I felt angry then and sad and curious as I wondered what inclines folks to chop indiscriminately. I also felt vulnerable as I stood in front of this big, noisy machine with the blades spinning and my flip-flops on. I was kind of tucking my toes in. I shouted a greeting to him, and when he looked up, I asked if he could please turn the mower off since we were screaming over the top of the engine and blades. I could smell the stumps of what used to be fragrant native calycanthus shrubs. To make a long story shorter, I realized this was not our neighbor, but another elderly family member who had been recruited to mow. It seems that Paul had forgotten to mention about the property line and the small saplings that we had talked about. Standing there, I reminded myself that we don't really own things, that we are just stewards. I flashed on the fact that this gentleman was just trying to help with the yard work. I know that we have different knowledge bases about our yards and different cultural reference points too. I even briefly thought about how nice it would be to have a condo with just a few things in pots instead of such a large and lush garden to care for. In the end, it became clear that just truly trying to have a friendship, some sort of relationship with the neighbors next door will be my and John's real focus. The other stuff will just have to work itself out. I glanced at all the plant parts and headed back inside. I don't know how this will play out, but I do know that I did not escalate the situation, which would have been easy for me. So equanimity lightens my emotional reactivity load, gives me a pause, and makes those difficult conversations possible. It doesn't solve everything, but it can inch things forward, maybe towards a situation that all can tolerate. Sharon Salzberg says, to have the radiant calm and unswayed balance of mind that we call equanimity is to be like the earth. All kinds of things are cast upon the earth, beautiful and ugly things, frightful and lovable things, common and extraordinary things. The earth receives it all and quietly sustains its own integrity. When I first read this, I was struck with the thought that this was written almost 30 years ago. And although the part about equanimity still rings true, I wondered with sadness and concern, is the earth going to be able to sustain its integrity, despite the ugly and frightful things that continue to be done to it and taken from it? I'm deeply grateful for some sense of equanimity when I think thoughts like this, amidst the bees disappearing and the waters full of plastic and mass extinctions. It occurred to me that equanimity might be a kind of fuel that allows our greatest thinkers and activists to stay steady and to not burn out. Consider a person of great spiritual courage like Martin Luther King Jr. When I watch his speeches, he's totally and completely engaged. And at his core, he seems calm and steady, so equanimous, embodying both at the same time. From that observation, it seems that equanimity is kind of a hallowed ground, a firm foundation for heart-centered courage. It's the capacity to be present with your whole being and simply not add fuel to the fire. Interestingly, we're also brought face to face with karma when we explore equanimity. From the teachings we hear, all beings are the owners of their karma. Their happiness and unhappiness depend on their actions and not on my wishes for them. What I take away from this is that the key to a robust spiritual practice is to gain control over the heart and the mind. All actions issue from heart and mind. Getting very upset is not helpful. We may feel something strongly and then let it be able to just pass through us like a summer thunderstorm, and then watch things clear and open to a bigger picture. All beings are the owners of their actions. So what if we were all able to develop this capacity of equanimity? Can you imagine the radiance of this room filled with equanimous beings, the de-escalation of all the unnecessary drama and anxiety. What a dream. Peace within, peace with neighbors, between governments, or at least wisdom and joy and compassion. Altogether, these inexhaustible states shining through our faces and our actions. In today's difficult and stress-filled world, this state of calm and balanced discernment is a spectacular sort of gift. Our practices encourage wholesome behaviors, cultivating ethical thoughts and actions. We're advised to dwell as often as possible in kindness, compassion, and joy. And because of this, a person of equanimity moves with quiet surety and wisdom through the world. We refer to this state as the crown jewel because it's an honorable state where there is no hidden agenda. We're transparent and we intend fairness. We're embodying the noble truths of suffering and understanding suffering with an eye to the end of suffering. With an equanimous mind, we're able to let circumstances fall away that cause suffering for self and others. We become well-wishers for all of humankind, while completely grasping that this wish is far from the way that things actually are. And so it's with a brave and heavy heart that we're able to hold that difficult truth with equanimity. With the Brahma-Viharas, we have capacity. And this is the term our friend Tware Sala brought from Seattle Insight when she spoke with us last fall. The capacity to hold much, the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And the interesting thing was with equanimity is that we hold all things equally near. So we're not pushing anything away or pulling anything close. It's a very non-preferential state. Thanks to the gift of equanimity, we develop the courage to stay open to suffering. And the paradox of that is that suffering is almost always lessened in this way for self and often for others. We become able to bear witness to suffering without turning away, with no aversion. And sometimes this is all we can offer. Equanimity is a state of wise dispassion that from the outside could be mistaken for indifference or complacency. But upon examination, it's quite different. So let's take a look at that. When I first researched these near and far enemies, I discovered that they're not in the early teachings of the Buddha, but they're contained in a respected commentary. This is the Visuddhimagga that followed about 500 years later. The near and far enemies remain excellent tools for us to help us see clearly when we may be fooling ourselves about these immeasurable states called the Brahma-Viharas. So let's go back to the difference between wise dispassion or equanimity and indifference or complacency, which is the near enemy. Both of these are cool states, and both appear rather detached. But indifference truly does not care, does not want to know about suffering, its causes, its end. Indifference simply looks the other way, disinterested and focused on self. And this is a subtle form of aversion. The far enemy of equanimity is a hot-headed reactivity, taking sides, losing sight of the big picture, losing sight of the impact of our actions and non-actions, and these are all forms of grasping and clinging. Mahatma Gandhi said, "The outward freedoms that we shall attain will only be in exact proportion to the inward freedom which we may have grown at any moment. And if this is the correct view of freedom, our chief energy must be concentrated on achieving freedom through reform from within." Dispassion is a word that we Westerners don't really love, and I think it's because we misunderstand it. After all, passion has been a buzzword in our spiritual community for decades now. I think this might just be a semantical issue. Dispassion is a cool, calm brightness. It's willing to be the witness to suffering and to learn by heart the causes of suffering and engage in the practices for its end. Dispassion is that part of equanimity that chooses to stay aware and feel the heavy heart tug of terrible things that cannot be changed. It's the ability to be with things completely just as they are, the full catastrophe of life, and to somehow not lose our love of life. So equanimity in community is the tool that keeps us related and connecting, even when we disagree, even when we don't understand. We don't have to take ourselves away. We can stay and remain open and try to understand our own or another person's pain with real caring. This is a relational tool that's very underestimated. Equanimity and the Brahma Viharas are all focused on relationships, and how we treat each other truly matters now more than ever. And so we continue to learn day by day how to embrace things as they are. Because it's not so much about what we're doing, but more about how we go about it. I ask myself, am I bringing a sense of ease into the world? Am I fluid or fixed in my beliefs? Am I in contact with my experience? Equanimity infuses life with the suchness or isness that's talked about in the Zen community. When we're in a balanced state of mind, we're non-reactive. We simply tend to align with things and can often see beauty without needing to change anything. And so the words, "as it is," are at the heart of equanimity. So here are 5 ways that we can continue to learn and develop a radiant, calm, and equanimous mind. Some are chosen and some are not chosen. The first one is loss and grief, 2 of the best teachers. If we're willing and able to practice during challenging times, hearts that are stretched wide mean increased capacity is possible. The second one is practicing skillful speech and skillful actions, skillful livelihood, keeping us strong in body and pure in mind, inclines us to being calm and having fewer regrets. Number 3 is a regular daily meditation practice. Number 4 is choosing a good community with the value of spiritual friends who are patient and clear with our foibles and us with theirs. We can grow our kind tolerance and our wise equanimity. And the last one, and maybe the most important one, is to simply be willing and available, to aspire to be a person of calm and equanimous mind. This points us towards the teachings and to the people who have similar aspirations. It's good company. It's us. It's all of us right here. So, just as we reconvene this meditation community in person and online, my hope is that the Brahma Viharas will be real dwelling places of great power for us as individuals and as a Sangha. Thank you for your ears tonight. May we dwell in equanimity.